We enter into this week of celebration of Halloween, the annual celebration. There's a lot of people who believe it so vigorously and strongly that they don't allow their children or their families to celebrate Halloween. Because for some folks, Halloween is connected to the dark side and things like the devil and so forth and being demon possessed. So next week I'm really going to delve into Halloween and what the truth is about Halloween and its origins and what it really means. But today I thought I'd start with the devil. What is this thing we call the devil? What is this all about? What do we think about it in unity? What is the truth about it? The truth that most clergy people, by the way, know, and certainly the scholars of the Bible know, because anyone who studies the Bible knows the truth about the devil. And these truth teachings are available to everyone. So are you interested to know the truth about the devil? So I'll be sharing those truth teachings with you. Who is the devil? How did we first get this concept of the devil? Where does the devil show up in the Hebrew scriptures? Where does the devil show up in the Christian scriptures? But most important, where does the devil show up in your life and in my life? And I'll also be sharing with you what unity teaches about the devil. So we're going to have a devil of a time. It'll be fun. But first, I'd like to start by letting you know that the devil is really known by many, many names. They're kind of interchangeable. I mean, you can get into the specifics, and this one comes from this origin, and that one comes from that origin. But some of the names we have are Satan, the tempter, the adversary, the antichrist, the evil one, Lucifer. Okay? And you're going to be hearing me use all of those names this morning, in one way or another. Now, William Fisher, who has this book that is called Alternatives, that I love, he writes in the book that the popular view of the devil is somewhat comical. He's pictured as being small in stature, red in color, small horns right on the forehead, a pointed tail, carrying, what, a pitchfork? Which is the weapon used to prod people into sinning. Just in case we need a little bit of help. I don't think we do, but Fisher goes on, sometimes he's pictured with a mustache, right? And a beard, and the pointed beard, of course. And he's also shown as having cloven hooves. And that, by the way, really resembles the Greek god. Anybody know the Greek god? That it resembles Pan. Yes. P-A-N. Now, we know lots of folks attribute tremendous power to this comical little figure. Yes? Mm-hmm. Actually, many believe that a battle continuously rages between the devil and what we call God over the very custody of our souls. Wow. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, more often than not, some people think the devil wins. Mm-hmm. Now, I kind of find that a frightening belief, don't you? You know, you can lose your soul to the devil. Because actually what it's doing is according more power to the devil than to God. And this belief makes me wonder if I have a right to call God Almighty, like Kathy did in her meditation today. Because if this belief is true, that the devil sometimes wins, then should we be saying God partly mighty? You can say almighty if the devil wins sometimes, partly mighty. But for God, the God for me, and I hope for you, is almighty. What do we say in our opening, our statement of faith every week? God is what? The one presence and the one power, which is almighty. So where do we get this belief about the devil? Where did it originate? Yeah, what are you? If I was the devil, I'd be going like this. No, okay. Well, where do we get this belief? Because in the purest Jewish traditions, and that's our tradition, folks, in unity, Jesus was Jewish, breathe. It's good, right? We're Jewish. And if you're a Christian today, you come from a Judeo-Christian background. The Jewish tradition is what? There's only one God. There's only one God. No devil, just one God. So when did the devil make its first appearance? How did it get so embedded, especially in the Christian tradition? Why do so many of our Christian brothers and sisters believe the devil is out to get custody of our soul? How did this happen? Well, we first hear about the devil in the allegory of creation in the Bible. There was no devil until Adam and Eve began to think in direct opposition to God. You know the story, right? Who's the devil in the story? The snake is a symbol of Satan, the devil, tempting us away from God, prodding us with that pitchfork. But folks, you need to know that the story of creation was not the first part of the Bible written. Just because it's at the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, does not mean that it was written first. Did you know that? No. Bible scholars know that many other stories were written in the Bible long before the allegory of the creation story. And there's two creation stories, but we're focusing on the one with the devil. The other one says, God created male and female in its image, and it was what? Good. That's the other creation story. So, which creation story do you think unity resonates with? Yeah. And which one does the folks that believe in the devil resonate with? Adam and Eve. Okay. So why was the story of creation written? If our Jewish tradition only believed in the one God, how did this get in to the Hebrew Scriptures? Well, during the period, now I'm going to try to keep you awake during this. It's a history lesson. We can do this. During the period in Jewish history known as the Babylonian captivity, in other words, the Jews were occupied, taken over by Babylonia. It's known as the Babylonian captivity, nearly 600 years before the time of Jesus. The first of the Jewish scriptures were recorded there during this time, because before that, how did they share their history? Anybody know? Orally. Through an oral tradition. So the first Bible stories began with the stories of the patriarchs. Those are the first stories. Who were the patriarchs? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it wasn't until much later that the stories of creation were developed. They have the start of the history of the Jewish nation. At some point somebody said, well, how did the world start? We know how we started. But what was the creation stories? How did the whole world begin? And what influenced the introduction of the devil into the allegory of creation leads us to the religion of the Persians. Okay? The ancient Persians had a two-God theology. They believed in a good God and a bad God. Okay? They had a God of darkness and evil and a God of light and goodness. And many Bible scholars believe that this Persian philosophy had a major influence on Jewish theology. Hence, the character of the devil became a part of the Jewish stories. And these stories in turn became the basis for the Jewish allegories referring to the devil. Now, another possible influence leads us to the Babylonian legend. And just to because I know I'm losing you. The Jewish people were occupied by the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks. They had 600 years that were not too great as far as freedom and liberty. So they're getting influenced by all these philosophies. So the Babylonians influenced them. They had a legend that there's a fallen angel. So the Babylonians believe, who's the fallen angel? Anybody know? Who grew up Catholic? Lucifer. And he is said in the Babylonian philosophy to have had an army of demons who went around helping people get into trouble. And some Bible scholars believe that Isaiah's reference to Lucifer in the Jewish scriptures relates to this fallen angel. Greek mythology also comes into the picture here. Remember, they were occupied by the Greeks as a possible influence, because in Greek theology, Hades was the kingdom of the dead, with both Elysian fields for the good, heaven, and places of torment for the wicked. What's that? Hell. The mythical Greek gods were in charge of these places. The good gods were in charge of the good places. The bad gods were in charge of the bad places. So, as I've already noted from Fisher's writings, the popular depiction of the devil of our times, even to this day, comes from the Greek god Pan. So you might ask, where were the Jewish people influenced by the Persians, Babylonians, and Greeks? I already told you. They got occupied by all of these folks. Really intelligent, bright, influential philosophies and cultures and so forth that infiltrated the Jewish traditions. So they were exposed to the legend of Lucifer. They were exposed to this two-god theology by the Persians, the good god and the bad god. And then, following the Greek occupation, they were exposed to this god called Pan, who walked around with a pitchfork and all that thing. So this all happened, folks, from 600 BC to 120 BC. It was a 480-year formative period. And that's when we got the creation stories. Coincidence? That they were written at the same time? And it was also a time when even a more powerful story was written about the devil that you find in the Hebrew scriptures. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The book of Job. Anybody ever read the book of Job? It's just the whole thing is a struggle between Job and who? The devil. Satan. In the book of Job, there's a fascinating story written about the devil, and there's an ongoing dialogue between Satan and God. Who's going to get Job? What a story! All right? And the prominence of Satan in this drama definitely helped to establish the traditional view of the devil as the second God. A God of evil who reigns in equal power to the God of good in this world. Now, the devil makes a couple other appearances in the Hebrew Scriptures, but I want to point out to you that out of 39 books in the Hebrew Scriptures, the devil's only mentioned in 4 of them. That's it. The other books are Zechariah and Chronicles, if you really want to study this. So where does the devil show up in the Christian Scriptures? Believe it or not, even less frequently than in the Hebrew. So we only got 4 books that even refer to the devil in Hebrew Scriptures. Even less times in the Christian. But the most powerful being we find in the Gospel of Matthew. Chapters 4, verses 1 through 11. Remember the story where Jesus wanders in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and faces 3 great temptations by who? The devil. Satan. Big, big story. So if you are going to take the story of Job and you're going to take this experience that Jesus had in wandering, not being in the wilderness and being tempted, it's a pretty good case that the devil exists, yes? I mean, especially if you're taking these stories literally, as many Christians do. But the real question is, does the devil exist as a separate but equal power of God? Do you want to know the truth? The truth that most educated clergy understand. I'm not just talking about unity. You sit down and have tea with an Episcopal priest sometime, or a Lutheran minister. You sit down and have dialogue about what is meant in the Bible, and you will be amazed at how unity people think. But they're not going to share it with their congregations. Very rarely. The expression, the devil made me do it, cannot be true because the devil's not a person. The devil is not a power or force equal to God. Not possible. As we affirm together, we affirm it together every week in unity. There's only one presence and only one power. But in the true Judeo-Christian tradition, there is only one God. And so what is the devil? Even if you believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, if you talk theology with these folks, it all melts into what? One God with three different expressions. We want to be Hindu, but we're just not there. The Hindu have many, many gods. We find different ways. It's really attributes of God, yes?
Yes.
All right. So there's only one God, then what is this devil? If it's not a person, if it's not a power equal to God, what is it? What is it? What is the book of Job talking about? What is the temptations of Jesus talking about? What happened to Adam and Eve in the allegory in the Garden of Eden? What does the serpent really represent? Do you ask any of these questions? I know I do. That's what keeps me going to school, keeps me going to classes, keeps me reading the Bible. What is this great tempter, this Satan, this devil? Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, describes the devil as, you ready? I know you guys know the answer. What is it?
Yes.
The human ego. Does it exist? You bet it does. The human ego. He says the devil is a state of consciousness adverse to the divine good. Yes, we believe that the devil exists as part of our human nature. So let's look at the story of Jesus in the wilderness with this perspective. Jesus went into prayer and fasting when he's out there for these 40 days and 40 nights. The perfect formula, folks, to get the ego whipped up into a frenzy. 40 days and 40 nights of fasting and praying. If you don't believe me, try doing this. Try it and see if your ego doesn't have a little meltdown. See how your ego responds to praying and fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, in unity, we know that 40 isn't to be taken literally. Anybody who's taken classes with me, Bible classes, knows 40 is just an expression for it took as long as it takes. You'll see 40 over and over that number. So don't worry about it. I mean, let's probably not going without food for 40 days and 40 nights. But as long as it would take to get his ego in a frenzy. Because that's the whole point. When we meditate, we are trying to center ourselves in the truth of our being, and then the devil, comes up and argues, gets into a dialogue with us, like the book of Job. So the devil arrives on the scene to tempt Jesus 3 times. And this temptation, folks, this intense struggle went on within Jesus, between what you would call your two selves, your higher self and your ego self. His Christ self having a dialogue with his sense self, the self that's influenced by its 5 senses, versus the truth of who and what he really is. So let me give you some context for this. Immediately before Jesus went into the wilderness, he had received the baptism of water and the Holy Spirit by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. And he had been commissioned through this baptism to begin his ministry. But first, he had to go through this struggle. This is a story for you and me, folks. This is our story. Jesus' story is our story. So let's say I decide I want to live a spiritually awake life. Do you think my human life is going to be 100% go for it, BJ?
No way.
No. I'm going to have to go through a struggle. And, this whole little episode in the wilderness, in the desert, that Jesus entered into is just a framework for us to look at the process of what we go through. This dance of wanting to put God first, wanting to express our divine nature and having our human nature distract us in so many wonderful and amazing ways, right? So first he had to go through the struggle to face and overcome the devil within himself, to face and overcome human temptations. Not that this is bad stuff, folks. You know, if you want to spend your life dancing in the flesh and having all the great experiences that we manifested in this earth for anyway, it's okay. But there may come a point where you say, I want to walk on a higher path right now. I'm ready to enter into the truth of who I am. And this flesh experience, this 5 sense experience, yeah, I've had it, I've done it, I've been there. And now I'm somewhere else in my consciousness. Well, the flesh doesn't say, okay, go for it. So he had to face and overcome the human temptations that had the potential to derail his higher calling. When Jesus was tempted to change stones into bread, he was famished. He was hungry. So here it is. He knew he had the ability to manifest anything. He was a master by this point. He knew he had the power to change one form substance into another. A power that he would call on, by the way, many times in his ministry to help others. But the question then was, would he use it to benefit himself? Turn these stones into bread. You can do it, Jesus. But when Jesus said, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God, he was declaring to his ego once and for all, there's nothing in this world that I can gain that's more important than my relationship with God. There's nothing I want out there that's more important than for me to express the fullness of my divinity. In the second temptation, when Jesus was at the pinnacle of the temple and was tempted to throw himself off and land safely, it was his ego's desire for quick and sensational recognition. You know, this is a big one for spiritual leaders. And you see it all the time. You know, the ones that have fallen down that slippery slope of ego gratification, the desire to be a star, to be noticed, to be special. It happens all the time. And unfortunately, too many of us on the spiritual journey, we come into this knowledge and understanding of all these wondrous spiritual powers, and then we use them to serve our ego. These are human temptations, my friends, and they're always there, tempting us to become powerful here and now. The ego to become powerful, right? If you're in the presence of somebody who's truly a master, and many of us have had that good fortune, you just feel like you're in the presence of no ego. Like there's no personality there, drawing attention to itself. Jesus responded, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. And so he's saying, I will not bring attention to myself with these powers. Instead, I will call forth these powers to express in and through others. I mean, how often did Jesus, people would try to give him the glory. What would he say? No one's good but God. Your faith made you well. I have to leave because you're becoming too focused on me, so I'll send you the Comforter, which is that internal awareness. He was constantly, his disciples would be following on the road, arguing with each other, who's the greatest? What do? He'd turn and say, the least of you will be the greatest. Get over yourself. Stop doing this. Okay? Not me, not my special powers. It's a God-given business. And finally, in the third temptation, Jesus is shown the kingdom of this world with all its splendor. And it's his for the taking, with his mastery of the spiritual powers. He could have become the king of this earth, the ruler of all people. And that's what his disciples wanted him to do, become a king. Establish a kingdom on this earth, overthrow the Romans. We've been occupied by the Babylonians. We've been occupied by the Persians. We've been occupied by the Greeks. We've been occupied by the Romans. Save us, Jesus! And he said, no, that's not why I'm here. Where is the kingdom? Within. We're establishing the kingdom within. And so what does he say? Get thee behind me, Satan. Get thee behind me. That is one of the greatest denials you can say. When you have the human ego thought come up, get thee behind me, Satan. I worship God and serve only God. Get thee behind me, ego, my lower self. And I'm going to put God first and serve only God. There was no devil, folks, outside of Jesus in these three temptations. There's only that struggle from within. And that same struggle exists for you and me. I believe that human beings have believed in the idea of a devil outside of themselves because of our unwillingness to assume responsibility for our lives, for this internal struggle. It's so much easier to say, the devil made me do it. But there's two voices going on within you all the time. The loud one, the ego, the BJ, and then that still small voice within, guiding, directing, so wise, so wonderful. The voice of the devil and the voice of God, the voice of the ego, the voice of the higher self. You know what we like to say, ego stands for? I know you guys know this. Edging God out. Edging God out. So I'm going to, where are we? Martin Luther, the founder of the Lutheran denomination. Any Lutherans here? It's okay. I'm an Episcopalian. You can own up. No, okay. He talked a lot about the devil. And he once was asked, Martin Luther, how he overcame the devil. And he said, when he comes knocking upon the door of my heart. Did you hear that? When he comes knocking upon the door of my heart and asks who lives there, the Christ goes to the door and says, Martin Luther used to live here, but he's moved out. And now I am here. And he says, then the devil takes flight. Did you hear that? That's unity. The ego takes flight. The devil is not an impish being with a pitchfork, prodding people into a sinful life. It is the human self of us, the ego, that tempts us to do things that we know are not for our highest good. But the devil cannot succeed if we choose once and for all to put God first. So in closing, I just want to move a little bit away from this subject about the devil, just for a moment, because I think we're living in extraordinary times right now. Extraordinary times. And as I'm sure you all know by now, no matter what happens in November 2016, do you know where I'm going with this? As a country, in this election, we are once again most likely going to make history. With another African-American man, Ben Carson, leading the polls in the Republican race, closely followed by a non-politician, Donald Trump, a woman, Hillary Clinton, leading the polls in the Democratic race with a quote-unquote socialist, Bernie Sanders, so close on her heels. It looks like, regardless of the ultimate outcome, we're going to make history again. We're either going to have the second African-American right in a row serving as president, or we're going to have somebody who's never been in politics before but is a billionaire. Well, we've had billionaires before. Or we're going to have a woman, or we're going to have a socialist. It's amazing, right? No matter where you stand on the ticket, you cannot deny that we are moving, and we have been moving into a new era. Yes. Into a new time when all things are possible. Our history wasn't that before, folks. Because it's the time, folks, to stop. So you might say, how is this relating to the devil? Well, it's time for us to stop demonizing folks we disagree with, who we happen to strongly oppose. You're going to have an incredible opportunity here for the next year. Oh, there's some kids in their costumes. You're going to have an incredible opportunity to understand that there's no good guys and there's no bad guys. There's no right and no wrong, no good, no evil. There's only what? One God. God the good is present in everything and everything. God is present in Ben Carson, and Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and in all the other lesser-known candidates, even Jeb Bush, bless his heart. God is present because, I feel for Jeb. Here's a guy, his father, his brother were presidents, and he is trailing, really low percentages right now. But regardless, in both the right, in the left, in the blue, in the red, in the Republican, in the Democrat, in the socialist, in the communist, there's no devil to oppose. There's no devil to defeat. There's no devil to overcome except for the devil in ourselves. Do you believe it? If you do, let's stand up and join together in singing, I Have Decided.